y'all, Dixie here. By request, today I am going to run through what a day in the life of a thru hiker is like, or at least what a day in my life is like while I'm thru hiking.
I don't want to go to school today.
So when I wake up, which is usually around 6 a.m. or so, sometimes a little bit earlier, more often than not, maybe a little bit later, but I go ahead and get up and pee because chances are I've probably been needing to get up and pee for a while. I know that's not good, but anyway, I get out, and while I'm out there, I go ahead and grab my food bag and return to the comfort of my sleeping bag. Now, if I was thinking the night before when I set up, and I set up in an area that's open where you could enjoy the sunrise, and hopefully I oriented my tent to where I could do that with the vestibule open while I'm in my sleeping bag so I can be warm while I'm watching the sunrise and start my morning routine. And then if I'm in the deep, dark depths of a forest, then, I might not so much worry about the sun coming up. Once I return to my tent, I go ahead and plug my phone up. That way it can start getting a charge for the day. Most of the time I leave it off during the night, and I don't like to charge it the night before because then if it's cold, even if I sleep with it, I seem to always lose a couple of percent on my charge. So I go ahead and wait till the morning and charge it while I'm going through cooking and eating and packing up and all of that. So then I go ahead and start breakfast, or at least the most important part of it, which is coffee. In my coffee in the morning, I generally put a Carnation instant breakfast, or if I can't find any of those at the resupply before that stretch, then I might use hot chocolate or some powdered milk and honey, or sometimes I just have to drink it black. When you're a coffee addict, you'll take it how you can get it. For breakfast, I usually do something pretty simple like oatmeal or a Pop-Tart, something like that. Usually all of my food is based around what I'm trying to do that stretch. So whether I'm just trying to do normal mileage, or if for some reason I'm trying to push through that certain section and get more miles done, that controls how easy it is to make my food, or if I'm willing to take a little bit more time with it. While I'm eating breakfast and drinking my coffee, I generally look through the terrain that's ahead of me for the day and try to pick like a targeted mileage for the day and kind of eyeball maybe where a good stopping point might be. Or sometimes I'll read a book through the Kindle app on my phone. Also, throughout my morning routine, I try to drink anywhere from a half a liter to a liter of water to go ahead and get my hydration going for the day. And once I'm done eating, I go ahead and wash out my food pot, kind of clean up everything from breakfast. And while I'm packing up my food bag, I go ahead and grab out some snacks. That way I have second breakfast while I'm hiking. Usually right about the time that I'm cleaning my food pot after breakfast, or sometimes even right in the middle of breakfast out on the CDT, my body decides that I need to go number 2. And for some reason, while I'm out on trail, it's not something that my body is like, I recommend you do this at some point. It's like it becomes an emergency and it has to happen right now. I mean, I have been in the middle of breakfast and have to set it down and go run. When you're out hiking for several days, and I assume it's the same on section hikes, but I know for sure on thru hikes, it's like you're a member of one of 3 different groups, and it can change during a thru hike, but you're either a morning pooper, a night pooper, or you're one of those sporadic ones that just kind of goes, whenever. But you can ask Aaron. It is pretty frustrating to be wanting to do a certain mileage by a certain time, and then suddenly that happens. It seems like he always had to go at inconvenient times for him, like, climbing Gray's Peak. But of course, before you leave camp, once you get to camp, or at certain breaks during the day is the best time to have to go poop. I hate that word, poop. Have to go do. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It's the best time to do that, but I guarantee you, your body will let you know whether it's a convenient time or not. Then I brush my teeth and comb my hair, and I tend to put baby powder in my hair, so I go ahead and do all of that stuff and then braid it. Next, I pack up my toiletries, my electronics, again, anything left that might be out with food. And once I get that all organized, I set them out in my vestibule outside my tent. Then while I'm still in my sleeping bag, usually because I'm a baby about the cold in the morning, I go ahead and change my clothes inside my sleeping bag and pack up my sleeping clothes into the little clothes bag, and then also put that out in the vestibule. And then finally, I unzip my sleeping bag and then cry at the saddest part of the day, which is deflating my sleeping pad. I mean, it's like the most awful sound in a thru hiker's life if you have an inflatable sleeping pad, or even if you camp around other people who do, because when you hear that noise, you know that the morning is over and it is time to climb out of your tent and start hiking. Finally, I go ahead and cram my sleeping bag into the compactor bag that lines my pack, and then I put in my sleeping pad and climb out of the tent. From there, I break down my tent, roll it up, put it in its stuff sack, and then put it down in my pack. And all of the little things that I was talking about are separate outside of my tent. I go ahead and pack those. And I put my snacks inside my hip belt, throw on my pack, and then I am ready to roll. Now, as a side note here, if it's raining, I do things in a little bit of a different order. Instead of putting all of my stuff outside of my tent, obviously, and then, packing up my tent while everything's getting soaked, I go ahead and pack everything inside my pack while I'm in my tent, and then put the pack outside. The last thing I do then is break down my tent and strap it to the outside of my pack. Now, my targeted time to leave camp is usually about 7 a.m. That's what I aim for. Sometimes it ends up being a little bit later, 8 a.m., and there have been even later mornings. Now, that's not necessarily typical of thru-hikers. A lot of people wake up before the first ray of sunshine even comes out, and they're up throwing their stuff in their packs, eating a bar maybe, and then hiking out and eating some snacks as they go. And some people even pack up, they don't eat anything at all until a couple hours later when they stop for breakfast at any given point. Some people are early to rise, early to bed. Myself, I am more like a late to rise, late to bed, but you just get in your groove when you get out there and you figure out what works for you. After packing up and getting going, I basically hike and hike and hike and hike. Sometimes I will take a morning break, and it's inspired by maybe I've gotten hot in my puffy or rain pants and raincoat, if I've put something on to be a little warmer, or even my sleeping clothes if I've decided to hike in my pajamas. Or maybe even I've hit the first water source and I'm refilling water because I didn't camp near water, and so I might go ahead and take a little break there. But again, the morning break is sometimes optional. It depends on how late I leave camp. Sometimes I just go ahead and push through until lunchtime. If I do take a morning break though, after a morning break, guess what I do? I hike. I generally hike 2 to 3 miles per hour, depending on, of course, how steep the terrain is. And also if there are blowdowns or it's really muddy, if there are a lot of creek crossings, all of that, of course, takes a little bit of extra time. So for second breakfast, I'll usually have a Pop-Tart if I didn't eat that for breakfast, or some crackers, and I even like those little pouches of baby food, just kind of some little snacks and stuff I find, and I try to mix it up each stretch. That way I don't get sick of the same thing over and over. Now around noon-ish, I kind of start scoping out a good spot for lunch. So like the ideal break spot would be a beautiful summit that also has a water source. And it just seems like those two things don't usually happen. Usually you hit your water source before the climb. So anyway, I do like to take lunch near water though. That way I can go ahead and camel up and get hydrated and kind of drink as much as I can there. That way I'm not drinking that much there and then toting a bunch of water to the next water source. So kind of try to camel up so I have to carry less right after lunch. Also, if I'm fixing something for lunch that I'm cooking, then I want to not have carried a bunch of water to just sit somewhere and cook that has no water when I could have just cooked at the water source. Now I just want to add in, when I've talked about all of these breaks, obviously if it's raining, then this whole schedule thing is shot, because the rain will definitely dictate your breaks unless you find, some kind of cover or shelter. But again, then you're going to stop there because, you get to do it without getting soaking wet. But if lunchtime doesn't necessarily fall next to a water source, then I always try to go for the view. At lunch, I'm gonna sit down, take my pack off, take my shoes and socks off, let my feet air out. If I can, sit in the sun, if it's been kind of a chilly day, I do that and kind of collect the warmth like a reptile. If my pack or tent or sleeping bag, any of that stuff is damp because it's been raining, but now the sun's out, I'm gonna go ahead and dry those things. Sometimes I cook lunch, sometimes I fix like a English muffin or a wrap. Again, that really depends on what I'm trying to do that stretch and if I just want something easy or something warm. And on lazy days, or if I'm breaking with somebody else and they're not done eating yet, then I go ahead and take the opportunity to get in a little nap. And usually at lunch or at some other break during the day, I'm gonna drink another cup of coffee. Because it's just so good and it's like liquid motivation. Now after lunch, if I'm not impressed with the mileage I've done so far, then I might try to pick up the pace a little bit. I know a lot of people tend to slow down after lunch, but I feel like I tend to push bigger miles in the afternoon. I'm also one of those people that works well after procrastinating, so under that pressure. So I guess that's my hiking style too. So I tend to, after lunch, I'm like, okay, I gotta get this in, I gotta make the miles that I didn't make earlier today. Now later in the evening, after I feel like I've, worked pretty hard after lunch, I'll probably go ahead and take my final break of the day, the evening break, eat some snacks, and I know that after that break is gonna be my final push to camp. So at that point, I might start eyeballing how many miles have I done, how many did I want to do for the day, is that number still possible, or am I even doing more than I had originally intended and now I can kind of take it easy, just kind of fill it out and assess the day. If I'm in grizzly country, at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and cook dinner, because I go ahead and cook dinner before it gets dark and before I'm at camp. I don't fool with the whole, triangle thing. That is a fine method to use, but I just don't want the smell of cooking food anywhere near my camp, not even 100 yards. So I make sure when I'm in grizzly country, I cook at least a mile before I get to camp. Now, some people are already up and walking for the sunrise. I generally get to enjoy sunrise from camp, again, if it's visible. But usually in the evenings between my last afternoon break and when I set up for camp, the sun sets somewhere in there. So I always like it when I'm up on a ridgeline and I can enjoy the sunset while I'm walking. And that's really kind of my favorite part of the day. I mean, everything's just golden and beautiful, and I end up taking way too many pictures and videos. But that's really my favorite part of the day. I've worked hard that day and everything's getting kind of peaceful. All the animals are kind of settling down and everything seems like, well, it's about to rest. Now, when it's about 20 to 30 minutes before complete darkness, I'll go ahead and give Guthook another look over and see, am I about to start a 5-mile climb that maybe I'm not motivated to do all in the dark? And, if you're on a climb, there's a good chance that you might not be able to find a good flat spot. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? So, I'll go ahead and scope that out, look at some of the comments in Guthook and see if anyone says like, hey, yes, this is a 5-mile climb, but there is a good spot in 2 miles up the climb, So just go ahead and start scouting out where I might want to camp for the night. A lot of times if I lollygag during the day, I don't mind night hiking to make up for it. I kind of enjoy night hiking. I've seen some critters and things I feel like I might not have seen otherwise. Because I night hike, I like how pretty the stars look. I like how creepy the trees can look. I really do enjoy night hiking, and I think it's a completely different experience. And if you've never tried it, don't knock it till you try it. I will say though that if you are just starting to backpack, it is a good idea to go ahead and set up during the daylight where you can kind of see everything. You want to make sure that the camp spot is safe and relatively flat, and that there are no widow makers hanging over where you're going to set up your tent. And for those of you that don't know, a widow maker is a dead tree limb that can fall and kill you. But when I get just about ready to stop for the day, usually I'll say to myself, you can do 1 more mile. Like, you can do 1 more mile. You can always do 1 more mile, and 1 more mile gets you to Canada or Maine or wherever you're trying to go. Once I finally do pick a campsite, I have to decide, am I going to set up my tent or am I going to cowboy camp? Now, reasons for cowboy camping might be there's a meteor shower and you want to catch some shooting stars while you're going to sleep, or maybe you just want to enjoy the stars anyway, or maybe you're aiming to wake up really early the next morning because a certain restaurant in the town that you're going to hit tomorrow closes at a specific time, and you have to hike fast to get there, or the post office closes and you got to get your package or whatever. So, and then some people just like the ease of cowboy camping because they don't have to set up a tent. But either way, you have to decide. Once I've made my decision, which for me it's normally my tent, just because I tend to freeze and the tent is warmer, I'll go ahead and blow up my sleeping pad and then lay out my sleeping bag. That way it has a chance to loft up while I'm doing everything else. If it's legal and safe to do so, I will build a campfire because I really love sitting by a fire. I just feel like that's the most relaxing ending to a long day of physical activity. And I know folks often call it hiker TV, and that's really what it is. I mean, try sitting by a fire and not going into a trance staring at the fire. I mean, it's almost impossible for me. If I'm not alone and there's somebody else to man the fire, then after I've built one, I go to my tent and change my clothes, put on my pajamas, my warm leggings, my long sleeve top, my puffy, my warm wool socks. I mean, I just really get all bundled up. While I'm changing, I usually do a little bath, you know, hiker bath. I take the wet wipes and I'll bathe all the gross areas of my body. I mean, everything's gross, but you know what I mean, the essentials. And take my braid out. Sometimes I leave it in, but I try to take it out and kind of let my hair air out and, you know, breathe. And I might run the brush through it if I do take my braid out. Of course, not everybody brushes their hair and puts baby powder in it and braids it, you know, so everyone has their little quirky things that they do. And I think each person's routine is probably a little bit different than everyone else's, just like everyone in general kind of packs their pack, you know, similarly, but not the exact same. And then I cook dinner. If I'm allowed to have a fire, then I'll cook over the fire because I just really enjoy that. Once I'm done with dinner, I clean my pot, I brush my teeth, and I go ahead and get all my scented items, my toiletries, check all my pockets for food wrappers, and then put all of that stuff in my food bag and go hang it, or at least get it away from my tent if I'm in an area that you can't really hang a bag. And then the last thing I do before I climb in my tent for the night is I pee, because I hate having to get up in the middle of the night and go pee. So I just go ahead, and even if I feel like I don't really have to, I do like my mama says, you know, when I was growing up, just try, and usually I can get something to squeeze out. Then I normally climb in my tent and send a message on the inReach, update the family, let them know I'm alive, ping them my location, and then I usually wrap up the day by writing in my journal. And then usually at some point before I go to sleep, once I've kind of settled down, I'll go ahead and review the terrain for the next day. I don't necessarily look at it too much in depth, you know, I really scope it out better in the morning, but I'll go ahead and just kind of give everything a look over, you know, how far it is to the next water source, some of the climbs I have to do, and maybe kind of recalculate how many miles per day until I get to the next town. Once I'm done with that, then I cut off my headlamp and I go myself to sleep and get ready for another long day of doing the exact same thing. I know some people probably wonder, how can you stand to do the same exact thing every day? And while yes, it is technically backpacking every day, so it's the same thing, but it is often so different from day to day. One day you might be walking in the desert, and the next day you're up on mountain peaks. You might be in a deep forest one minute, and the next thing you're in an open field. And then sometimes you're even walking straight through suburbia. I mean, it really is amazing on a thru hike how every day can be different. You might meet different people who totally change your day. Maybe you're having a bad day and you're suddenly so inspired to push on, and that was the exact person that you needed to run into that day to, you know, help you feel encouraged. I mean, it's just a crazy experience that you do the same thing for 6 months, but every day is so different. It's like you get to pick up and move. You know, I told my mom that I always feel like I'm packing up my apartment and moving somewhere else, you know, each day, because that's exactly what I'm doing. And like I said, this is a typical day on trail for me, but the beauty of trail life is you get to choose. You have complete freedom of your life there. I mean, sure, if you run out of food, you know, you kind of got to push it to get to town, but again, you caused that, right? Like, that is of your doing. Some days I do not hike, but other days I'm like, you know what, this is a perfect camp spot and I'm done. I'm setting up here, I'm gonna enjoy the sunset, and maybe I'll wake up a little bit earlier in the morning. The point is that, yes, while you do kind of get into a rhythm or a routine out on trail, it's the most free I've ever felt in my whole life. But again, everyone does things different. I'm sure that there are people who would tell you that this is not how they do a thru hike at all. But I do think that all thru hikers do tend to get in some kind of rhythm and find over time what works for them. So if you have any questions about a typical day in my life on the trail, please feel free to leave those in the comments below and I will be happy to answer your questions. And thank y'all again so much for watching and supporting this channel, and we will see y'all next time.